We have time for one or two more questions. Anybody? Oh, we have two right here.
And one in the back.
Three. If people could articulate their questions quickly, that would be great.
Okay. If we had home rule for taxes, that would change the money picture, but that's not my question. I was thinking about the element of your April Fool's Day prank, the one where you said the city would commit itself to all legal means to reduce the sale and consumption of unhealthy foods. And I guess I'd like the perspective of the panel on what could we be doing to reduce the unhealthy food sector.
Hi, my name is Shannon Caravello. I'm a health educator at Kingsborough Community College, and I do a lot of volunteer work on the farm. Partly why it's an amazing place to be, which is why I'm there, and also in addition to that, I have two small children. I'm living on a very, very tight budget. So I see the farm as a way for me to educate and to learn how to grow food, as well as to participate in a little bit of work share. You know, if you're out there doing a lot of work, you get a little bit of tomatoes, and that's, you know, helps me with my budgeting. I was wondering if you've seen good examples of work share programs, especially maybe for mothers out there. Is that working well in Toronto?
Great. And the last question in the back.
Hi, my name is Josh Eisen. I'm wondering if you can address, we talked a little bit about distribution and speaking to farmers, and again, it's anecdotal. Access to market and transportation to market has been a huge issue. It's being addressed to some degree in food hubs, but there seems like there's a tremendous amount of infrastructure that's somehow not connected in a way that's useful or cost effective. I'm wondering if you can address some of that as part of the solution.
Great, thank you. Panelists?
So in terms of work share, it's another one of those very counterintuitive to progressive politics, but food share actually has lots of great examples of how they work so well. So our Good Food Box is packed by community volunteers and corporate volunteers. Community volunteers get a free box and lunch. Corporate volunteers don't get a free box and do have lunch with us and pay for it. And it's a huge thing, and people really love it. People love coming and working for a day. My experience of low-income people, working with thousands of them in Toronto, is that they would like very much to give back. And so I think it is very much, I think sweat equity, some of the programs that I've seen in Brazil that were mind-boggling were people rebuilding their own housing on a sweat equity model, and you had to put 15 hours in, and there was a transparent sheet in the community center where everybody's name was, and you had a show, and I was there with a group of anti-poverty activists who kept saying, this is horrible, why are you shaming people? And the low-income community leaders would say, no, we have to show that we're each of us putting our 15 hours a week in. And the first unit we built went to the one woman who was sick and couldn't do her work, and she had a big family, and so people can be very progressive about it. But yeah, so I think there's quite a lot in that. I think your question around transportation was very important, and we didn't get into it. It's very hard to talk about subsidized food in the United States or in the world because of the United States subsidies. And all over the world, people hate U.S. subsidies. Farmers all over the world, if you say the word subsidy, go, oh no, that's U.S. subsidy, that's, you know, dumping. And I was in a meeting of some small organic farmers in rural Ontario, and I was doing my little subsidized shtick, and this woman stood up and said, if Debbie says the word subsidy one more time, I'm going to shout, you know, I'm an independent entrepreneur, I don't want a check in the mail. And I said, well, if the City of Toronto Public Health Department sent a refrigerated truck out here and picked up your produce and sold it at markets like Sacalo markets, that a model that I'd seen in Brazil where the truck actually came from the municipality, and she said, where can I sign up? So I think farmers really like and need all kinds of supports that are really the equivalent of subsidies. They just want it to be done in a way that's respectful to them.
I'll take the question on, I think it's a great question on what about foods that are less healthy, and what do we think about how to reduce consumption or think creatively about how to address them? We haven't talked that much about that, but as you know, New York City has proposed a soda tax in the past, and I think when we think about how to really address both consumption of unhealthy foods, but also how to raise money for potentially supporting healthy foods, that's probably where you have the greatest opportunity. And I think, you know, Right, there's a lot of politics around kind of local government and state government taxes, but if you were to really think about a soda tax going back just to support increased access to healthy foods, I think it would be really a win for everyone involved.
And I hope I'm not the final comments on this, but I think when you talk about the work share possibilities, and I'm just thinking of myself in terms of CUNY possibilities, it would be really interesting to see work study reconfigured as some sort of work share program around food. I think that would actually be extremely powerful and get people involved at all sorts of levels, whether it was the growing, harvesting, recipe development, distribution, or nutritional advice, around the food. I think there's a lot of potential there. Just one comment about distribution, and I think it's an important one, and it goes back to something that Debbie mentioned earlier about market failure, and something that as I was trying to speed through this history of sort of New York City's role in public markets, transportation is always going to be an issue. We have a fairly large city with a fairly large area that we're drawing from, and at various times during our history, and I think you mentioned again the importance of not just one terminal market, but quite probably more than one terminal market in New York City. And related to that was sort of thinking about the role of the public sector earlier in the 20th century, that the public markets were built in neighborhoods where the private sector failed to find high profits. So as grocery stores were expanding in the early supermarkets were investing, they avoided the lower income neighborhoods and the public markets were constructed. As grocery stores and supermarket chains began finding profits everywhere because the cost of food was dropping so rapidly, they built in those low-income neighborhoods and within a couple decades started pulling out of those low-income neighborhoods. And I think part of the issue around distribution has to be, I think, thinking about public infrastructure around food distribution as something that's a long-term investment that is not always in response to market failures, but simply as something that we decide as a society is just an infrastructure that is non-debatable. We didn't rip out subway stations because some stations are used less frequently. They're in place. And as the city's population shifts, they become more and less used. I think the same way we have to think about our public market system as something that simply is. It's in rich neighborhoods, it's in poor neighborhoods, it subsidizes the creation of small businesses, it subsidizes the distribution of healthy produce, it subsidizes the regional economy, it creates jobs. And I think if we can start thinking about that geography as something that's not in response to where the private sector fails, but is something that we commit to, then I think we start a really interesting conversation around how public dollars can be invested in supporting some of these changes.
And to spare you the burden of having the last word,
Thank you, Nick.
I wanted to add some thoughts to Jan's question. And I think fundamentally the question here is what, as a city, as a nation, do we think is the responsibility of the public sector and what's the responsibility of the market and the private sector? I think that's at the heart of this discussion and at the heart of many discussions in our society today. And certainly in the recent past, and especially with the sort of Ronald Reagan pronouncement that government is the problem, not the solution, there's been a very concerted ideological attack by the corporate sector on the notion that government has the capacity and will to fix problems. I think that's been a lot the debate around Obamacare. And to my mind, in public health and in food, it seems fundamental that government has a responsibility to protect public health, and only government has the resources and the mandate and the capacity to make that responsibility primary, to be the person or the entity that, as Debbie said, wakes up in the morning and says, how are New Yorkers going to find healthy food to eat today? And I think that the ideological response to the attack on government, and that we all need to be thinking about what role can we play in this, is to restore the visible hand of government in protecting health. To say that, yes, it is a government responsibility to ensure that healthy food is available, that companies not profit by promoting obesogenic, diabetogenic food to children and other populations. And that requires taking on a different set of tasks. And as I said earlier, we're very interested in the Food Policy Center and exploring that over the coming months and years, and we really welcome your thoughts into how to get that discussion going in New York City to talk about what is the public sector responsibility for food and how do we use that wisely and to achieve goals around health and justice and environment. And I want to thank you all so much from the panel and from the audience for your great questions. And if there's any healthy food left on the table, please eat it.
Oh, I'm glad. Yours.